Welcome to episode 39 of the International Web Effectiveness Podcast, where Bill Hunt and I, Bill Scully, focus on the strategies and the techniques necessary to improve your web presence and manage your global websites. Before we get into it, please make sure to follow International Web Effectiveness Podcast so that you don't miss an episode. And if you enjoy these conversations, please make sure to leave us a review. It helps motivate us to continue making more shows in the future. In the last episode, we reviewed the main topics challenging our industry, such as Google's removal of the num 100 parameter. Today, we've got another fantastic guest, Adam Gent from Indexing Insights, and we'll be chatting with him on the state of indexing. Google's index is shrinking, large-scale sites seeing thousands of URLs drop quietly. Today, we're really asking the question, why? And hopefully we'll get into what SEOs can actually do about it. We've prepared a couple questions for Adam, but we're going to keep this open. And I guess I'll ask the first question. So, Adam, why is indexing performance management not viewed as mission critical?
In my experience, it's because it's very difficult to monitor, to actually report on, right? You get a free tool in terms of Google Search Console, but there's a lot of, for certain websites, there's billions, millions, hundreds of thousands of data points, and you can download 1,000 rows, and then you have to go through you have to add web properties one by one onto the Google Search Console account. That's difficult at scale. Not that you can do it. You can pragmatically do it through the API, through the Google Search Console API. But that's very difficult. So in my experience, that's why people don't make it mission critical. It's a data point, and it's also not very well understood, if I'm honest. I began to build a tool that monitored things, and I didn't really understand what I was looking at until I began to watch things change dramatically. And it fundamentally changed how I understood indexing, and now I think it's oddly more like quite important to understand about what's happening in Google's index, especially with AI.
I think that it's not Google Search Console is the only place you can get that information. Really, it's not intuitive at all how to use it. When you talk to most SEOs, they're looking at it for rankings. They're not looking at it for page. I don't know what you would call it, but the status of the pages. And, like I guess any database, if you're looking at it in one view, you really don't understand the connection between the other views. I reached out to you because I had saw your presentation deck from where was it? It was the last one.
Brighton SEO.
Brighton SEO, yeah. And you had this thing that you call crawled previously indexed. I mean, that to me is the standard of what people should be looking at. All of these other things are like looking in a rearview mirror.
So just to jump in on that, I'll tell you a little story about that. So crawl previously indexed, to anyone listening, means a page that was indexed is actively changed to not indexed by Google's index. And that in Google Search Console, in the reporting of page indexing, it is put into the crawled, currently not indexed report, right? Now, when I first built the tool that I was building, to Indexing Insight, to monitor all this, it was so prevalent, was this active removal, like so prevalent, that we had to create a new indexing status called crawled previously indexed. It was that prevalent in the data, in our tool, so we had to create the report, the new indexing state, which now our customers can see which pages are actively being removed in real time out of Google's index. And it's not in Google Search Console. Well, it is, but you just don't know it's there because Google Search Console don't really point it out as clearly either. Because fun fact, sorry, I'm ranting, but the crawl previously, the crawl current not indexed report is sorted by last crawl time, right? If you have 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 crawl current not indexed pages, well, Google doesn't recrawl the page for 130 days. It gets actively de-indexed. So you'll never see the pages that are actively removed in Google Search Console because they're way at the bottom of that report. But you'll see the recently crawled pages, which are the pages which are I don't know, maybe they were crawled, but Google just didn't bother indexing them again. So you won't. Sometimes on large sites you will not see those pages being actively removed, which again is a reason why customers are using our tool, because they can see it in real time and they can action it. Something you can't do in Google Search Console. And again, it's one of those things you wouldn't know that unless you messed around, played around with the data, like I have, and understand all those things. I mean, Google doesn't really make it clear in documentation or talk about it, which is another super frustrating thing.
I think you described it really clear. I always question like the data because it's only a subset of data in Google Search Console. But I never gave it a conscious thought that report basically cleans itself every day, and if you had a huge drop in the past, it would be gone. You would never know it if you hadn't looked at it in 90 days?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Wow.
Well, the reports, the trend lines in the data are 90 days, but it from our data, 130-day indexing rule. If a page is not crawled, and by the way, people think that it means that if Google recrawls a page, it'll get re-indexed or something. It doesn't mean that. It literally means the crawler has not come back, has not recrawled the page, and that means the state changes in the index. So it doesn't need to crawl the page again to change the state. The crawling and the indexing state are separate. They're independent processes, as far as I can tell, in the system. And that's what you're seeing in the page indexing report.
And I haven't had a chance to look at your tool, but does your tool map the last crawl date with
Yes,
Wow. Oh.
In our support documentation, we have a page about this, but we have something called the crawl coverage report, which breaks down all of your data into these time buckets. So we take the last crawl time, calculate the day since last crawl, and group your pages into these 30-day, 60-day, 90-day, 130-day time buckets. And we can tell customers which pages are going to get actively removed from Google search results and put into the not indexed bucket or status because of the last crawl time. Again, the trend was so prevalent. So it was, and this 130-day indexing rule is not my rule. It's a rule that some European SEOs, professional SEOs, discovered, and we have the data to kind of back it up. But it was such a powerful trend that we now put it into a report, and it's for all our customers. They can see anything after 130 days. Those index pages get 99% chance of them being not indexed. So now I use these reports to see which pages are going to get not indexed, basically, and they can tell which pages are going to get actively removed before they get removed.
Wow. So I'm going down a rabbit hole here, but obviously that's a leading indicator of problems, right? So if 90 days, if the trend is, like, let's say you had a section or you had a page type or a template that was starting to trend in the 100-day not crawled range, there's a high risk of those being dropped at 130 days.
Yeah, as far as I can tell, reading into the technical documentation and the DOJ trial documents, etc., it seems that the index tells the crawler what to do, and the crawler will recrawl your pages based on the signals in the index, based on the information Google has crawled and processed and picking up over time. If your pages aren't, I'm going to air quote this for anyone listening, high quality. I want to talk about quality because I talked about it in my Brighton SEO talk, which you probably want to touch on. If your pages aren't up to quality, you will be crawled less, and to a point where Google, and this is the other interesting thing about the data in Google Search Console, your page can be actively forgotten, and over time, at about 190 days, if that page hasn't been recrawled because of the signals in the index and the crawler doesn't come back to recrawl it, the index status changes again. And it changes to discovered, currently not indexed. That means that Google is forgetting your pages because there's just whatever quality signals are there aren't there. Yeah. And they're just actively forgetting them. And eventually you will hit, if it's not recrawled ever, you'll hit URLs unknown to Google. Now, what's funny is you will never see if your pages go backwards, the Google Search Console report will never tell you that. It will never show URLs unknown to Google report. It's never seen them before, right? but most of the pages will go into discovered, crawled, currently not indexed. So that report has both discovered, currently not indexed, and URLs are known to Google pages. But I have a newsletter on this and a blog post on this on Indexing Insight in the newsletter, where I basically found there are like 90% of the pages in discovered, currently not indexed are URLs are known to Google, because Google is just forgetting these pages because of the lack of quality signals in the index around pages. It forgets it over time, basically.
Well, let me stop you there. I can see Bill's brain going, thinking like an engineer. You got to have some questions that came out of this conversation.
Well, I mean, I'm sort of letting you drive it because this is a very passionate thing for me. I take a much less gentle approach because I think it's bullshit that people don't pay attention to this. It's like you want to win the lottery, but you don't go buy a ticket. And I think, Adam, you highlighted what you wrap them in reasons. I wrap them in excuses because this is your doing. We can monitor a lot of this. And, spending 30 years at the enterprise level in search, I've dealt with this, and it doesn't have to be 100% inclusive. Let's start with our mission critical pages. Let's make sure they are. I mean, in all the big companies I've worked with, we created multiple accounts in Search Console at the product category level, at the folder level. And so then we could see and we could get, we could understand data within just this particular type of software. So yes, it's hard. And like everything, that's hard. It requires effort. The one thing I want to point out in Tokyo at the Search Central Live, Google had a really good slide. It's in Japanese, and then I'm going to put my sort of event notes up. They really broke this out. And Bill, you and I covered this before. And I don't think enough people really detect this. Google is as dysfunctional as everybody else, right? They have a crawling team, they have an indexing team, and they have a serving team. And these guys rarely talk. And so, Adam, exactly as you were describing, it's some signal, some trigger, some sensitivity is saying, go get this and not go get this. And if you just think about that, right, during the indexing or the crawling process, Google encounters a set of URLs, either from external sources or because they came to your website, they got your XML sitemap, wherever they got it. Then I've been trying to write this for probably 6 months. I gave a keynote at PubCon where I talked about sort of where your passion is about understanding this. And Bill, where you probably saw my reaction, this is all about compute.
Yeah.
There was some interesting numbers. There was a guy that was one of the speakers. He's now on spam defense and was talking about the amount of effort that they have to deal with spam. I think it was 7 trillion URLs, and more than half of that is garbage. I mean, legitimate spam garbage. And they have to sift through this shit. And so you start to think about this, where do we put our effort to go fetch something? And Adam, as you're seeing those timelines, if you start to see using your tool or, pulling it into Airtable or wherever you want to do it, something to say, hey, anything that's not been seen. The one thing I really want to point out why this is important to do is if you launch something, let's say I'll give you a perfect example. I know a company that won a project to install schema for 15,000 pages. They installed schema, and then 6 months later, their client's like, dude, I'm not seeing the performance you promised from all the featured snippets and all this. And they're like, well, it's going to come, and Google's doing this. And so when I was called in to help them understand why, first thing I did was take Screaming Frog and use the API. And every day for like a week, I got 2,000 points across these URLs and found that 98% of the URLs that they put schema on hadn't been indexed. So if they haven't been indexed, and especially if you're injecting schema through JavaScript and it hasn't been rendered, then none of that's even available to Google. So like when you make a big change to your website or something material from an SEO standpoint or any of this stuff you're doing from a geo standpoint, and Google, none of that matters until Google not only revisits, but reindexes it. then the clock can start ticking. So that was my point, was if we've got a set of URLs that are critical, let's use your tool at least, or any other tool that can tell you when was it last seen, as an indicator that if it hasn't been seen, it obviously can't start affecting the performance you hoped it would. And to me, this is such a fundamental part of an SEO's job. And to me, there's no excuse that anybody can give for not doing this type of stuff.
Yeah.
To the point where this company now built into their workflow a way to do that test as part of their onboarding protocol and their monitoring protocol. So, I love seeing tools like yours. And I like it when, in one of the questions I had for you, and you mentioned it in your intro statement, was you learned a lot about crawling and indexing by doing this. And that would be one of my questions is, what are the 2 and 3 things you learned? Now you mentioned, the seen but not indexed and what that means, but, just a few of those nuggets that you found only because, you were neck deep in this, trying to figure out what all this stuff meant, how to present it in a sane manner that's actionable. So what are those 2 or 3 things that you've seen that other people may not have discovered yet?
Ooh, good question. So in terms of lessons from me, I'm going to say lessons from building the tool, working with my tech co-founder. Number 1, your page can be indexed one day and 24 hours later it can be de-indexed. So it's not checking the indexing status is not an indication. There isn't it's like in search analytics where the impressions go up and down and the average position goes up and down. And you're like, ooh, something's going wrong here, because something's happening, right? It's literally there and it's gone, right? And that's where, but here's what's interesting, right? Here's what's interesting, Bill and Bill. Here's what's really interesting. It can fluctuate. So what's weird is that a page can disappear one day and then be back the next day. So it goes indexed, not indexed, indexed, not indexed, indexed, not indexed. It can fluctuate. It goes in and out. I talk about this in a newsletter and in the Brightness SEO deck, but to quickly summarize, right? I think that there is a benchmark. Google manages its index using some kind of benchmark score that it gives all its pages, right? It has to, because like you've said, there is a limit of how much it wants to index. Right? It could probably index the entire internet, but it doesn't want to do that because it's a business. It doesn't want to spend tons of money like that, right? Well, it has a benchmark score, right? That benchmark score works with, it's called the soft limit, just below the hard limit, right? The soft limit being the percentage of just above the hard limit, so they don't hit that hard limit. And if you've got too many pages indexed, right, eligible to appear in search results, if you have too many of those and they go above the soft limit, or your benchmark score, which is basically anything above the benchmark score is indexed, anything below the benchmark score is not indexed. If that shifts upwards, as in it gets higher, well, more pages get de-indexed, not indexed, because they don't meet that score. And then, actually, we don't have enough pages indexed, or then the benchmark score decreases, and then more pages are indexed. So what I think's happening is pages can jump in and out of this quality. I call it a quality benchmark score, right? And it jumps in and out of this, right? So I've seen some people be like, "Oh, I checked my page and it was indexed, and then I checked it again and it was not indexed, and then I checked it a week later and now it's indexed." And I'm like, that's why. And this thing is dynamic. It isn't a fixed score. It literally changes daily based on search, like global search needs, search interest, what's in the index, what's not in the index, what's not eligible to appear, and what is eligible to appear. And I guess, the third thing is just the thing that I didn't really think about, and I already mentioned it, but Google, the vast majority of things that we have seen are from our monitoring in our tool, from the data that we have, is that pages are actively being removed from Google search results at a scale that I didn't read. I did not think about this when I looked at crawl current not indexed. I thought literally it meant, oh, they've crawled it, but it's waiting in some kind of queue or a pipeline or something. No, it is assessed and crawled and processed pretty quickly. And it's probably, here's the thing, lots of stuff gets indexed that should not be indexed. I've literally seen product pages with an image, a title, and a buy button. Hundreds of these things indexed. And then actively removed out of the index. I think Google has to literally index, process, remove. I think there's so much spam. I think it can, these things are use cases, right? If you work in software, there's use cases. They'll have like thousands of use cases of what is stopped to get in, right? We do not process this. We do not waste our time with this. But then there are lots of other things that what we would consider low quality, they're like, yeah, but it doesn't meet one of these thousands of use cases, so we're just going to get it indexed.
And I think that's where that benchmark score comes in.
Then there's even more stuff I could talk about. But yeah, they're the three things, really. The
Cool.
Yeah, basically.
Let's dig into that a little bit, because I have some questions. Bill, you were going to ask something.
No, I was just going to say that benchmark score. So this piece that I'm writing, and then we're building a course for developers, sort of SEO for developers. And it's taking a true developer mindset. And one is, asking the developers to brainstorm this sort of benchmark criteria. If we had limited resources to ingest stuff into our search engine, what are those limiters we would do? And you start to think about that, there's the needs, there's trends. It was very interesting. The Google Trends guy came from Israel, and he was talking about, how, still, I think it was 15% of everything they see is net new. And so I do think that there's various variables that they apply. The other one I see is it referenced elsewhere? And so I built this grid, which I'll share. I just need to finish it. I was worried. I didn't want to deal with all the community's commentary. So that's why I've been hesitant to put it out there, but I just don't give a shit anymore. But it's this idea of where would I limit it? And I think that you're right, that what is in the news, what is in demand. The other one is it anything additive? And I think that's why it may pull in a lot of this low quality stuff. And again, quality between crawling and indexing. Bill had a question for you that I'm going to address as part of this now, the whole canonical thing. And we talk about this on a previous episode that came out of a Search Central live where somebody asked Google, and Google basically said, hey, we have a duplicate team, a whole team that's within crawling, sits between crawling and indexing, and how they define, duplicate and what is the canonical, and do they use canonical tags, and do they do all this? And I think that was an interesting thing. And it gets to this point of now we've got the whole rendering side of this where, it could fetch something, then it's got to come back and render it. And so that's why we see things like if you're injecting hreflang or canonicals or schema through JavaScript, it may be instantaneous, or it may be a lag for them to come back with the rendering engine in order to render it to get that stuff. So I think all of these things are out there. The other one is exactly compute. I really think I heard this reference like 4 times in Japan this week was compute. Google is sort of stealing resource or reapportioning resources away from crawl and indexing into their AI modes.
That's what I was thinking was happening. Yeah.
And so they're being very, very selective. And I think, Adam, your benchmark score, I think is really in flux with them saying, okay, how do we ferret out a lot of stuff we don't need to get? How do we, and 2 points, other points I want to make real quick before I forget them. Number one is that's why I think we see stuff being dropped out, stuff not being revisited in X period of time because it's not additive. They have it. It's again, the thing I think a lot of people don't know about AI, the whole geo thing is there's 2 components. There's in model, which is stuff that's locked in, like the capital, of France is Paris, We don't need to crawl 9,000 pieces of content to figure out that it's the same thing. We need one true source. If we want to know is what's going on in Paris today, then we need RAG. We need to go out and fetch stuff. I think Google's starting to get that. Have I locked down certain content? Thus, I don't need to go refresh it. So I think there's a lot of that going on. Number two, that was actually came up is with all of the stuff Cloudflare is doing with gating, how much of that is impacting it? So a very direct question was asked of Google. Cloudflare, if you're using Cloudflare and you have it turned on for them to manage your robots text file, which is default now, it's putting that long legalese. And I wrote a whole article about how because you put a statement in your robots text and because Google saw it, doesn't mean that they accepted your contract to crawl or not. There were people that were saying that now that they have this statement to say, you can only do it for this purpose, this purpose, this purpose, that Google had significantly reduced the amount of crawling they were doing on those sites. Google had no comment on this. They were like, well, we really don't know what's happening. But there was multiple people that were saying that the crawl rate on their site had dropped almost to nothing. And the only thing that's changed was them putting that sort of, I guess, contract or disclaimer in their robots text file. So I think this is going to be causing problems because, nobody's taken it to court yet to say that it's an implied contract when you fetched a robots text file that said you can't use it for training data. But anyways, these are just things that I think we got to think about. And the third one is that we're seeing a lot now is because of all of this crawling. And I've seen people get $5,000 and $10,000, small sites get $5,000 and $10,000 bills for their hosting for the amount of crawl tempo from AI and all that. Do you see in what you're looking at, I know you're predominantly mining stuff in Google, but do you see the AI need and sort of the RAG need to ingest this stuff being another point to where you needed to monitor your index rate, specifically Google? Because Google explicitly said that Gemini and all of their AI stuff is using what's in their index as one of their primary sources. So do you think that makes it then more important to make sure you're monitoring your index rates and inclusion rates in Google?
That was a lot. Okay, so I will answer your questions because I think they're all tied together. So bear with me, okay? So I'm going to start at the beginning. I'm going to talk about page quality, and it does. I'm going to get start page quality. I'm going to get to AI because it does connect. These are my thoughts on it after looking at things and reading about things and watching things get de-indexed. So here's my thoughts. Google in the DOJ documents, the engineers, the people who are asked questions talk about signals, right? And these signals, there are lots of different signals, right? But signals are basically information stored about every page that they crawl and index, right? Doc IDs, they're called, right? Google doesn't actually, we all think of things as like page URLs because that's how human beings are. Actually, what Google's index does is it stores the doc ID of a piece of content and it assigns it the canonical URL based on all the signals it finds on the internet. I think there's like 40 signals. But basically that doc ID, right, around that doc ID is PageRank, vector embeddings, it's the knowledge graph connections, it's understanding where it is in terms of the cyc architecture, in terms of the knowledge, the domain host and things like that. Like Google has lots of information signals around any page, right? There are raw signals, the signals it literally extracts from your pages, links, content, title tags, meta descriptions, right? And there are computed signals, right? Your page rank, your vector embeddings, right? Things like that. What's interesting is Martin Splitter said this, and I found this very interesting. Google's index is big, not because of all of the page content it stores, but because of all of the signals it needs to create around the content, right? The largest part of its index are these signals, okay? Now, I say this is interesting because in my talk at Brighton SEO, when I was doing my research around indexing, in the DOJ documents, they talk about 3 key signals, right? 3 big signals, computed signals that they use: topicality, quality, and popularity, right? I don't want to talk about all 3 because that's literally probably a podcast unto itself. But what's interesting is quality, right? And quality is very interesting because page quality is talked a lot about by Google as referencing indexing and crawling, right? Over the years, John Mueller has actually banged on about page quality a lot in his Hangouts, in Google Hangouts, when people used to go back in the day when people used to show up like this, ask him questions, and he'd talk them through things. He'd talk a lot about page quality of the website, quality of the user experience, right? Guess what they talk about in the DOJ documents? Google seems to be measuring user engagement, quality of the backlinks to your pages. How you talked about then, I already have this content, right? They have like 4-dimensional maps of topics, right? Vector embeddings. They understand how your page fits into that topic, and if they probably already have that content on the internet, right? The difference between a lot of websites isn't the content, because Google themselves have said we don't really understand the content in terms of quality. The difference is to them, how many times are people visiting the page? Does the domain get a lot of traffic? Are people visiting these pages? Are they linking to the pages? Do the pages themselves internally link well? Link architecture, right? The reason why Google keeps, and Bing, bang on about this stuff so much is because I think that's what their page quality algorithms that are associated between each page is looking at. It's aggregations of all of these different signals combined together to give them a page quality score. Now, one of the biggest signals is user engagement, right? Good clicks. You can't get that data in Google Search Console, but the VP of Google, like product of Google, of search, she talked about good clicks. And the DOJ document talk about good clicks as well, annoyingly, but we don't get that data, right? Basically, how well do people visit a page from search session logs, and how, do they go back and revisit the pages, bounce around, things like that. Adam, why are you talking about this in relation to AI? Well, it's really interesting, Bills, right? ChatGPT doesn't really have decades of experience battling or building quality algorithms, does it? It's built an AI bot that you can talk to and kind of super massive autocorrect in terms of what it tells you, right? Pulling the average from the internet and telling you, autocorrecting basically on steroids. Like, super powerful technology, but quality wise, it doesn't have the same experience as Google. Google's index is unique in that it helps Google shift through what is low quality and what is high quality. The problem is what we think quality is not what Google quality thinks. Google thinks quality is about people click on a result and they get their answer. They stay on the page. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean the content of the content is high quality. It just means that lots of people visit the page, lots of people visit the domain, lots of people link to the page or the domain itself, right? Unfortunately. And the content.
Well, those are proxies for quality.
Yeah, exactly, right? And in terms of AI, right, Google has the ability to pull this from their index. When you're saying to me, do you think the index is important? I think it's massively important, because in the future, in a zero-click world, knowing if a page is eligible to appear in search results indexed helps you understand it is answering questions. It has not been crawled in this index page hasn't been crawled in 90 days or 60 days. It'll probably get quicker as technology moves on and AI gets quicker, right? But your page hasn't been crawled in 90 days, 60 days. Might be because it's not answering a question, and then you can start pulling in your log file data, pulling in your referral traffic from AI, if they give it to us and it's ever in great detail in analytics. But that's what I think, why I think indexing matters, and kind of why I'm betting on it is because it's like you said, it's a proxy for quality, right? If it is eligible to appear, like if your index pages, the indexed green bar indicates you are above a certain benchmark threshold in terms of quality, well, then you should have the data to tell you which pages are green and which pages are grey. Because if they're grey and if they're being actively removed, as I see on a daily basis from customers, well, why are those pages being actively removed? Could be internal linking. But in my deck, I talk about this. In most cases, it's because nobody visits the pages. Nobody visits these pages. Like, nobody engages with them. Nobody bothers with them. So why publish 10,000 pages nobody's going to bother with? Because Google will just de-index it.
Right.
So
and
that's
then
why
I think along those lines too, it is again a proxy for quality, a proxy for need. Like if you write 10,000, you create a mega glossary on particular topics. This is where I think there's a big problem today, because if you want to know, you're an enterprise company, you're hoping to rank for or to get, a featured snippet or something, or get the AI overview for supply chain management. What is supply chain management? That's really not going to happen, because that's been locked in, and they don't necessarily need that. So, but what is your value add to that? If you're SAP and, where did you add to supply chain management? Yeah, you're the leader in it, but what value did you add? One thing I want to pick up on, I'm doing a workshop later today for developers on AI. And in AI mode, if you go into Google AI mode, because you could always do this in the others, say, why didn't something show up? And Bill and I did an episode where, he was arguing that brand was very important, and I was less bullish on it, but he proved me wrong. And in this, in AI mode, I asked Google, why didn't this brand get chosen? And in the results, and one of the things that it said was, I don't want to give the feature of that, but this amenity appeared to be very deep in the site. It was 5 levels deep from the top level navigation. It was all flowery, they used the word fluffy marketing content, as opposed to the one we selected, which was directly linked off the homepage and, was direct to the point. It had, different services and solutions. So I guess this gets back to your point about, is it surfaceable? Is it deemed to be quality? I mean, this was Google telling me on their behalf why. Saying everything you said, it was deep in the site. So it wasn't, surfaceable, if you will. It was more fluff than value. It wasn't really contributing to things. And I think that page, we could correlate it to, it probably hasn't been seen in a while. So if we were to improve it, and this is sort of where I was going with why we want to monitor this, because if people are going into all this structured, but whether your structure is restructuring content in a linear manner or in a linear format, or you're using schema or anything like that, if it's not being seen and not being revisited, not being reindexed, then none of that is going to have a positive effect for you. And I think that's one of the things for me is, and I think the third one is that you've talked about, is the quality, the overall quality of what they're ingesting. And I'll just make this really quick point. I had somebody reach out to me recently. They did a replatforming, a domain migration, and completely changed their URLs. And in Search Console, we went into settings and whatever that report's called, with how many good pages versus errors. And it was 96% of Google's pings were returning something other than 200 indexable, meaning that Google was encountering some barrier. And their developers and their search experts were all saying, they said, it's not about these errors and problems Google having to get to our stuff because of a whole host of things. It's because they haven't done a core update. And because they haven't done a core update, they haven't come back to reindex our content. And I'm like, but if I come and knock on your door 10 times, and of those 10 times when I try to pull the handle to enter your store, the door is locked, am I going to come back an 11th time? Really, am I going to come back the second, third, or fourth time? And then, but this whole audience was like, yeah, maybe it is the quality and the fact that we have so many errors. But it was so interesting that this whole group of like 15 people, nobody wanted to admit how hard it was to crawl the site and how many errors. Like it was 10-1 for every good page was 10 error pages. Nobody saw that as a problem. And that's why I love when, when you're writing about things about making sure it's clean, make sure it's valuable, make sure that you're teeing yourself up for success. I think the more people that can elevate this and get it at a higher level, the better it's going to be. Because one thing Bill and I really are passionate about is overall web effectiveness. And I think the work that you're doing is, directly correlated to overall web effectiveness. So I'll be quiet for a minute because I know we want to give you some time to talk about the direction you're going with things, where you see things going, what you're doing with your solution. And I think Bill has one or two follow-up calls because we want to respect. We know you've got somewhere you've got.
I'll just ask a quick question because we want to get to the good stuff that Adam has. So I think there's at least two things that are forcing your pages from being disindexed. One is their capacity for indexation. Like Bill, you mentioned, they're giving away compute to AI, so now they have less space to keep stuff indexed. So that number changes. And then the other is obviously quality. Now, if your quality is low and you drop out, at least in my experience, the only way to get Google to come back and at scale relook at all of those pages is basically, make a shift in your site so that during the next core update, Google decides to re-crawl your whole site. Is that your experience? You must have some experience in recoveries with your tool, right? I want to remind people of our free Facebook group where we use that as an opportunity to discuss these things, and you can ask any questions you want. You can also suggest ideas for upcoming podcasts. You can find that by searching International Web Mastery Free Group.
Yes, but it isn't the way that you think. So some of our clients, so there's a concept I'm coming up with, right? I guess this kind of leads into what's happening next or what my thoughts are on the future. There's a concept I call page value management, right? So one thing I've always done as a consultant over many years working in the industry is to look at which pages are contributing towards SEO, effectively, like the performance, and which pages aren't contributing, right? And it's interesting because if you pull in different metrics like the popularity, like quality in terms of links, internal linking to pages, impressions, clicks over time, etc., a content audit, if you will, right? What I noticed, and now I'm kind of teaching clients this at the same time, is helping clients understand, and I've seen this and had success in it, is there is a flaw in Google's system, right? We talked about page quality, right? And we talked about, using those different signals for Google to crawl and index pages is based on this quality. If it's above that benchmark score, oh, hey, great, we'll get indexed. What if your website is so authoritative, or it's just middle of that authority, right? It doesn't have to be like overwhelming, but in your topic, in your area, you have some good authority, and Google comes and crawls your pages, right? What happens if you start just throwing pages out, like just publishing tens of thousands of pages? Well, Google gobbles them up. But what's interesting is every page that's indexed, and John Mueller said this, every page that's indexed contributes to the overall quality of your website and a site section. So what I do is I really look at what pages that are indexed are doing well and not doing well. Because if you have a lot of pages and they're not contributing, they're dragging your website down. I've seen websites with millions of pages, 16% of the website pages are getting traffic and impressions. The other 2 million index pages are not contributing at all. And I'm like, this is a problem. And they're seeing a decline. Right? And I'm like, well, similar to your shop analogy, right, Bill? Okay, you can't get in, but when you do get in, all the food's spoiled. And there's like one or two shelves of good food. I'm like, I'm not staying here. It's horrible. I'm gonna get out. That's what I think people miss. Like, I mean, you've been in the industry a while. Like, people just publish content. Nobody stops and takes stock of the inventory on their website and what's contributing and not contributing. What our tool helps people do is capture which pages are indexed, see which pages aren't being crawled as often or frequently, pull it out analyze, review, and understand which of these are contributing and not contributing. And a lot of times they're surprised to find that, oh, of course Google is not coming to recrawl these pages. It doesn't contribute to anything. There's no search volume around it. Nobody's searching for it, so who cares? We don't really internally link to it if it does have search volume or any kind of, interest. The content isn't as good as our competitors. Actually, we don't integrate it with social media, email, paid, it's just like a bolt-on set of pages that are there in our website. And I'm like, well, what do you expect Google to do then? Because Google's got these topicality, quality, and popularity. It literally aggregates these signals together. And yes, if you have a massive authoritative website, it takes a bit longer for these things to happen, but it does happen, right? In my deck on Brighton SEO, I show an Indeed example where 95% of these new pages were released were indexed and 5% were being actively removed. And I'm like, I didn't look at the data, don't have access to it, but big guess is, I reckon it's because of a lack of interest or a lack of visits to these pages. Or maybe just a lack of internal linking, maybe, I don't know. But that's what I think the future holds. And people are like, oh yeah, but AI. And I'm like, well, as I said, if every page contributes to your overall site quality, and we know Google has that site quality score because of leaks, etc., well, when Google starts doing core updates and things start dropping out, how are you going to know what's appearing in AI if you don't have any click data or impression data, which apparently drops by like 50% when the num100 per round turns off? Do you know what I mean? Like, how do you know anything? Well, indexing and index status is a good leading indicator to understand which pages are appearing in search. That's what indexed means, eligible to appear in search. And if you have too many of those pages that are indexed, because Google's greedy, it's a greedy goose, has a flaw in the system, and you have a high authority of hundreds of thousands, millions of pages not contributing, it drags down the rest of your site, and you stop appearing in AI, in Google's AI features. Well, it could be because you're not taking stock of what is indexed and what is contributing towards overall search health, so to speak. And that's kind of where I want to take my tool, basically. In the next few months as well, I'm going to launch a service to help people understand this as well, because there's definitely something in it, because I'm helping people. And a lot of people, like you've said, don't really take stock or don't have time to take stock and don't have the data and don't have the capability or sometimes even the time to understand any of this. So yeah, that's where I want to take this tool, Indexing Insight, and myself and my tech co-founder, and help people like you to quickly analyze and understand where the gaps are in which pages should be, not removed, but reviewed, like rethought of, take stock of. Because sometimes it's just staring at the reports and the data and being like, actually, yeah, like this is not contributing.
Right. Basically. Well, I want to be conscious of your time. I know you got a hard stop.
Yes.
This was a great conversation. I think we're going to have to ask you to come back. I have more questions.
I mean, I love to. I love this conversation. Yeah, this is great. Thank you for having me on, by the way, Bills. I really appreciate it. You're the first people to ask me on a podcast, and I really appreciate that.
So why don't you tell us where people can find your tool? I want to give a shout out for his newsletter. His newsletter is probably one of the 3 that I absolutely have to read, because it's unique and has a perspective based on data. The last 3, I think it was, you didn't talk about the massive de-indexing in, was it May?
Yeah, there was an update and something happened because it changed all the metrics and everything got kicked out faster. I'm not sure what happened, but something happened. There is evidence, by the way, that every core update Google actively removes pages.
And I think you're like one of the few people that actually talked about that. There wasn't a lot of chatter about that, and I think it's because people aren't looking at Google Search Console the right way.
I caused a bit of a ruckus with Google. Yeah.
So sorry, I didn't mean to jump in there. So yeah, tell us everything about you and where people should go and
sure. So I'm tech co-founder, or not? I'm the co-founder of Indexing Insight, indexinginsight.com. It's a tool that helps you monitor Google indexing at scale. I've talked about some of the features during this podcast, but basically we help. It's just an advanced version of the page indexing report. It gives you historic data for your pages. It allows you to see which pages are actively removed. We try to make it as easy as possible to get the most out of that, of your data, of the indexing, the URL inspection API, which is pulling data out of the Google index. We are 2 to 3 times faster than any other tool, as far as I can tell, at getting the data. Nobody else can seem to get the data as fast as we can. It seems to be quite useful for a lot of people. There's a newsletter, newsletter.indexinsight.com, completely free. I give my thoughts on indexing, things I find interesting, topics, data points, things like that, which the Bills have said they really enjoy. And yeah, that's it really. You can find me or talk to me on LinkedIn, Adam Gent, or Indexing Insight. Ask me questions if you want, or support at indexinsight.com if you have more questions. More than happy to answer them.
Great,
Perfect.
Thanks.
Cool.
Bill, final thoughts?
No, this was great. It's great getting, somebody that's into this,
Yeah.
Every day and from multiple viewpoints. And so it was great. Yeah. Appreciate you having on. And again, this is something I'm very passionate about. So it's good to see other people are, and really appreciate what you're doing to try to increase awareness in this area.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you bringing me on. Thank you so much, guys.
And Bill, are you still doing the biweekly series on
I am.
Journal?
Yep. They just renewed it for me to do another 12 to 15 articles. So
That's great. All right. If you've made it to the end, we hope you're finding value in our conversations. If you're enjoying the show, we'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to write a review on the podcast. We also want to hear from you. Your feedback motivates us to keep doing these things. For all episodes and transcripts, visit internationalwebmastery.com. And until next time, thank you. And thank you, guys.
yep. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Hey, this is Bill Scully. I just wanted to let you know that we have a free training course called Demystifying hreflang. It includes 6 modules and is over an hour long with a quiz at the end of each module. You can find it at internationalwebmastery.com. Hope to see you there.